You can be turning to 1 Peter, if you will. Our lesson will be centered there, but we won't stay there the entire time. But the first two chapters of 1 Peter are filled with big concepts. Terms that are defined and illustrated throughout the Scriptures, both Old and New. Things like faith, grace, love, joy. Things like pilgrim and sojourn. Concepts of a spiritual house, a priesthood, a holy nation. We're going to look at one item today that's found there and look at it across the Scriptures, and that is holiness. So the text will be from 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 15 and 16. But as he which hath called you is holy, so be ye holy in all manner of conversation, because it is written, Be ye holy, for I am holy. It's interesting to note the context in which this is written. As you read through both books of Peter, you realize he's writing to people who are suffering. He speaks of heaviness through manifold temptations. He uses that word suffering multiple times. He talks about the fiery trial that they are to undergo. And yet he still lays down this standard. There's no bend in it. Be holy as I am holy. Even in the face of suffering, even when it's difficult, be holy. And this is a concept that is rooted in the Old Testament. And while there are biblically many differences to be made, many distinctions to be made between Old and New, there are also those things that are similar, also those concepts that we see in both. And so for most of the lesson today, we'll be looking at some Old Testament references that include this idea of holiness, and then lay it alongside some New Testament passages that relate. And we'll start with what Peter seems to be directly quoting from here. And there's actually a few different places in the book of Leviticus where it is said, Be ye holy as I am holy. The first one is Leviticus 11, 44 and 45. For I am the Lord your God, you shall therefore sanctify yourselves, and ye shall be holy, for I am holy. Neither shall ye defile yourselves with any manner of creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. For I am the Lord that brought you up out of the land of Egypt, to be your God. Ye shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. Again in Leviticus 19:1, Speak unto all the congregation of the children of Israel, and say unto them, Ye shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Leviticus 20 and verse 7, Sanctify yourselves therefore, and be ye holy, for I am the Lord your God. Later on in that same chapter, in verse 26, And ye shall be holy unto me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and have severed you from other people, that you should be mine. And the first point to be made is that all the commands matter. If you were to go back and look at the context that each of these verses we just read were stated in, sometimes it's right after laws of cleanness and uncleanness. Sometimes it's in the middle of discussions about sacrifices and how to sacrifice. And sometimes it's in the middle of the kind of commandments like the Ten Commandments and others as well. And as we think about that phrase, be holy as I am holy, what standard did Jesus live by when he walked this earth? Did he not live by every word that proceeded out of the mouth of God, jot and tittle included? And the next passage I want to look at is in Deuteronomy 7. And the next point to be made, and it's kind of similar to the first, that sometimes it requires, or oftentimes it requires, extreme effort and even extreme measures to attain to this standard. But in Deuteronomy 7, verses 5 and 6, people are told, But thus shall ye deal with them. Ye shall destroy their altars, break down their images, cut down their groves, and burn their graven images with fire. For thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth. A similar idea, so we see this idea of separation. A similar idea can be found in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, starting in verse 17 and going into the next chapter, where it says, Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you, and be a father to you, and ye shall be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty. Having therefore these promises, dearly beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God. And it's interesting as I consider this concept. The people in the Old Testament, they were told to physically separate themselves. We saw in that verse that they were to destroy, things, all the idols and the groves. We know from many other verses they were to destroy the people as well, and not to leave any remaining. And they were warned, if you do, it'll be a problem for you. And if you know the history of Israel, that's exactly how it went. And it's just interesting that we're called to be separate, though not quite in the same way. We're not told to create our own nation, to completely physically withdraw from the world, and yet we're to still be spiritually separate. But is there not still a danger? We saw the danger. We saw how it worked with the people of Israel. Are we aware of the danger? We live among, figuratively speaking, the altars, the images, the graven images. Are we aware of that danger? Are we doing all we can to resist, to make sure we maintain our separation, our holiness? The next verse I want to look at is one we've looked at earlier, but we're going to look at it more in depth, is again from Leviticus 11 and 45. And pay attention to this first part, where it says, "For I am the Lord that bringeth you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Ye shall therefore be holy, for I am holy." So here we see this idea of holiness, of being holy, connected with remember who I am. Remember what I have done for you. Specifically, he mentions bringing them up out of the land of Egypt. And that is an event that throughout the law he mentions over and over again. Throughout the history books, throughout the prophecies, from time to time he keeps making mention of who he is and what he did for them in bringing them out of Egypt. I've created a small list. I'm not going to quote, but I'll give you the references just to give you an idea of how often this is repeated. Leviticus 22, 32 and 33. Leviticus 23, verses 43 and 44. Leviticus 25, 38. Leviticus 26 and verse 13. For those keeping count, there's 4 times in just 5 chapters. And if you read through that, he gives a section of law, and he says, I'm the God that brought you up out of Egypt. He gives more law. I'm the God that brought you up out of Egypt. Moving on, we see it in Numbers 15 and 41, Deuteronomy 4 and 20, Deuteronomy 5 and 16, Deuteronomy 6 and 12, Joshua 24, 5 through 7, Judges 6 and 9, 1 Samuel 10, 18. And again, there are many others. That's just a small fraction. It's said so many times that if it was the hand of a man that wrote it, we would say, I get it. I heard you the first time. You don't have to keep telling me over and over again. But when it's God writing it, we realize, apparently I do need to hear it over and over again. Apparently I do need to be told. Apparently I do need it brought back to my attention over and over. And so the question for us is, do we not have something even greater that we now have to look back to? Have we not even remembered it this very morning, and do we not do so each week? And so while the standard hasn't changed, we're still to try to attain to holiness, yet it does seem maybe the motivation should be even stronger. The desire should be even stronger now. Can you imagine living under that law? You fail, you falter, you don't live up to the standard, and you're wondering, you don't even know how it's going to be okay. And these prophecies keep coming down to the centuries, some here, some there, but it's still all a mystery to you. But we've seen it clearly. We've seen the love of God. 1 Peter, if you go back there, it speaks of this. Shortly before the text that we're considering today, starting in verse 10, going through 13, it says, "Of which salvation the prophets have inquired and searched diligently, who prophesied of the grace that should come unto you, searching what or what manner of time the Spirit of Christ which was in them did signify, when it testified beforehand the sufferings of Christ and the glory that should follow. Unto whom it was revealed that not unto themselves, but unto us they did minister the things which are now reported unto you, by them that have preached the gospel unto you with the Holy Ghost sent down from heaven, which things the angels desire to look into." And then the start of the next verse, "Wherefore, because of all these things," and ultimately he's going to lead up to, "be holy." The next verse I invite you to consider is from Genesis 17. And here the language is different. The word holy is not used, but I think the idea is the same. So in Genesis 17, the first verse, it says, "When Abram was 90 years old and 9, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, Walk before me, and be thou perfect." Now that idea of walk before me indicates in light of the fact that I see you, in light of the fact that I'm watching, walk in that way. Be mindful that I'm here, that I see you. And I'm surprised that in the next verse it doesn't say, and Abraham fainted. I've never fainted in my life, but I think if I was there in his shoes, I don't know that I couldn't have avoided it. What would it have felt like to hear that, to have God show up directly to you and say that? But now I ask the question, should it feel any different to us when we're reading it on a page from an apostle? By the way, they're sometimes referred to as holy apostles and prophets. And the scriptures are referred to as the Holy Scriptures. And while I know this statement was given to Abraham, we have a similar statement in Hebrews 4 and verse 13. Neither is there any creature that is not manifest in his sight, but all things are naked and opened under the eyes of him with whom we have to do. And so I encourage you to work on building up this idea, this awareness that God is watching. And in keeping with this idea of the presence of God, you remember in the Old Testament that even though God has never dwelt in temples or in things that man has made, he's always been omnipresent, yet at the same time he's chosen to say, I will dwell in this tabernacle, I'll dwell in this temple, I will identify my presence with the city of Jerusalem. And can you imagine what it would be like to be in those settings, to walk into the temple, the gravity, the seriousness that would have been attached to that? Naturally, you probably would have been filled with wonder. Even walking into secular buildings of some importance, oftentimes we're filled with this sense of grandeur. And sometimes we have that sense maybe when we're in the church building, and we try to be on our good behavior, and we say, oh, don't say that or don't do that within the church building, wait till you're outside, jokingly. But still, the biblical view is this, that we each are a temple, and also that we collectively are a temple, with each of us being a lively stone. In 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 16, it says, Know ye not that ye are the temple of God? Him shall God destroy, for the temple of God is holy, which temple you are. In 1 Corinthians 6, 19 and 20, What? Know you not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost which is in you, which ye have of God, and ye are not your own? For ye are bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. Again in 2 Corinthians 6, verses 16 and 17, What agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And as we continue to think about this concept of being holy as he is holy, I want to compare and contrast this to the philosophies that we so often hear, the justifications, the excuses that are common. And they're common in our culture, and if we're not careful, if we're not on guard, maybe it seeps into our thinking. But the first one, this is a big one, and I think it's becoming bigger and bigger in our world. The idea of be yourself. And I don't know about you, but I know enough about me that I don't want to be myself. When I read Romans 3 and verse 10, I don't want to be that. It says, As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understands, there is none that seeks after God. They are all gone out of the way, they are together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Their throat is an open sepulchre, with their tongues they have used deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways, and the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. And I also consider, I don't know if you've ever done this, but as I read through the scriptures, as you come across the lists of sins, do you ever slow down and grade yourself and think, which of these have I not done? Or which of these am I in no danger of ever committing again? And so to the Christian, we shouldn't have this idea of being ourselves, but rather to be a new man. As Colossians 3 and verse 10 says, And have put on the new man, which is renewed in knowledge after the image of him that created him. Another phrase we often hear is, that's just the way I am. But to a Christian, we should be able to say, that's the way I was, but I've been buried into Christ and raised to walk in a new life. We may hear it said, we may have said it ourselves, that I can't help it. But know according to Luke 18:27, that the things that are impossible with men are possible with God. In Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. In 1 Corinthians 10:13, there hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above what you are able, but will, with the temptation, also make a way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. And so I'd encourage you, rather than spending time trying to rationalize away, trying to excuse sin, let's use our efforts to try to find that way of escape and make sure that we take it. Another one we also hear is, well, I'm human, or I'm just human, or I'm only a man. And I've pondered on this before, and sometimes I wonder if maybe there's some false humility involved. Maybe I wonder if we've denigrated too much of what it means to be human. After all, we are made in the image of God. And if you think of that phrase, oh, I'm just human, we use it to excuse sin, we wouldn't say, oh, I'm just made in the image of God. That would no longer make sense. We see that clearly. And did Christ ever use this excuse? We know he was human. From Hebrews 2 and verse 17, wherefore in all things it behooved him to be made like unto us, his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make reconciliation for the sins of the people. And again from Hebrews 4 and 15, we know that in all points he was tempted like as we are, yet without sin. Something else we may often hear is, well, I just have one vice, or just have that one sin. And yet, going back to 1 Peter chapter 1:15, where it says, be holy in all manner of conversation. And again, we ask the question, we're to be holy as God is holy. Does God allow for sin? Does he indulge in it? Does he belittle it? Does he ever laugh at it? You know, some time ago, I was in a store, and it was a store where, it sells decorative items like for your home. And I saw a few different versions of a sign. And it didn't sit well with me when I saw it. It started out well. It said, I love Jesus. Then there was a comma and a but. And in one case it said, but I still cuss a little. And other signs said other little things like that. And I thought, and I know that even as Christians we struggle, and even as Christians we sin. But to blazon it, to put it on a sign, to display it in your house, it seems to indicate a level of comfort with it, a level of it's just okay, and that's just how it is. And I imagine, what if Jesus were alive and you invited him to your home? Would you display that sign? And so I ask, when we say these things, are we just making excuses? And are we just belittling sin? And I would offer to you that if that's what we're doing, we're hurting our own selves. That the better way is to openly confess, to admit, to take ownership of it, to say, yes, we have sinned, and to ask God for his forgiveness. We know that he is faithful and just to do so. And I want to give a few practical considerations, I guess. And these are some things to mull on, for you to think about, food for thought, if you will. These are things that are still in my mind. There are certain topics that it's hard to define all the lines that may be involved. Hard to define everything about the topic. Things like modesty. Things like, what is foolish talk and what is jesting? We're warned to get rid of those things. What all is involved in that? When is something railing and cursing? I think sometimes the things we see on social media, oftentimes it's involved with politics. Sometimes, some of the things I see, I'm like, is this railing? Does this count as cursing? Some other topics, what do we watch? What music do we listen to? And in all these things, I want to first of all say, based on this idea of being holy, of trying to obey every command, the first thing I would offer you is don't ever dismiss these as minor or unimportant. And do all you can to read through the scriptures, to find everything that applies, and then do your best to apply them. And beyond that, I would also say, to the extent that there's doubt, or the extent that there's maybe some gray area in your mind, be sure to err on the side of caution, of maintaining that holiness and making sure that you're not touching the unclean thing. And as we near the end, I don't want to indicate that there's no hope. I don't want to indicate that this is the standard, we have to live it. If we fail, it's over. There's no hope. Of course, that is not the case. But I do want to stress and emphasize that it is the standard. And I never want it to be that we simply accept sin, that we become comfortable with it, that those things that maybe we find ourselves doing somewhat frequently, that we just say, well, can't win all of them. But that rather we strive, that we buffet our bodies, that we attempt to mortify our members. Again, look for that way of escape. Try to find out what and how we can do, and through it all, praying for God's help, and through it all, looking to Christ. But knowing this also, that He's the only one that lived perfectly up to that standard. And He's the only one capable of making us, in the end, truly holy. And so I'll end with a quote from Colossians. It's in Colossians 1, verse 21 and 22. "And you that were sometime alienated and enemies in your mind by wicked works, yet now hath He reconciled in the body of His flesh through death, to present you holy and unblameable and unreprovable in His sight, if you continue in the faith, grounded and settled, and be not moved away from the hope of the gospel, which ye have heard, and which was preached to every creature which is under heaven, whereof I, Paul, am made a minister." If you have any need to respond to that gospel, or if you have any need for the prayers of the church, we invite you to come as we stand and sing.
Thank you for watching this video. We're glad that you have found our channel, and in fact, while you're here, we would encourage you to subscribe to the Jones Road Church of Christ channel. We have several videos already up, and we believe you'll find these to be true to God's Word, helpful to you in your journey toward God. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us and let us know how we can help you.